It's funny how sometimes the most serious lessons about gravity, about consequences, and yeah, about really expensive mistakes, are taught in the absolute silliest ways. Today, we've got the story of a very, very expensive chandelier, and it all kicks off with this weird, half-forgotten rhyme.
So, does that sound familiar at all? It kind of sounds like a nursery rhyme, right? But its real story is way more interesting, and as we're about to find out, it has a surprisingly destructive punchline. So, let's dig into where it actually came from.
All right, so where on earth did this weird little verse come from? Let's unpack its origin story.
Now, you think this was for kids, but nope. This rhyme actually came from a public information film. It was part of a big UK health and safety campaign back in the 70s. The whole point was to be, quote, daft in delivery, deadly serious in truth. And you know what? It totally worked. This thing was so catchy, it just stuck in people's heads for decades.
Okay, but a rhyme from the 1970s doesn't just magically pop into someone's head decades down the line. It needs a keeper, right? A mentor to pass it on. And that is where a woman named Gertie enters the picture.
So let me introduce you to Gertie. She was in her 60s, an absolutely diligent and careful worker. But she had this core belief that work should also be fun. She was a master of using these daft explanations to teach really serious lessons. And she kind of became this mentor and maybe a partner in crime to her young protege, Gerry. So you see, for Gerry, this rhyme wasn't just some old jingle he heard once. Gertie made it real. She took this piece of public safety history and basically hardwired it into his memory. It became this living piece of workplace wisdom for him. And this is where it all comes together. We're in a department store in Glasgow in the mid-2010s, and this is the exact moment where Gertie's daft little lesson is about to have a head-on collision with a very, very expensive reality. Let's just talk about the stakes here for a second. £3,560. That was the price tag on a bespoke, handmade crystal chandelier. A customer had been waiting for weeks to pick it up. And as you can probably imagine, she was absolutely thrilled to finally be collecting it. Now, the official way to get this thing down was crystal clear. It was a two-person job. You needed two ladders and two people to handle it carefully. A simple, safe, totally logical process. But there's always one, isn't there? The guy who has to show everyone he's stronger, he's smarter, he's got this. For the sake of our story, we're just going to call him Albert. And Albert decided he didn't need any help. So Albert climbs up the ladder all by himself. He disconnects the power. He wasn't that stupid, but the second he took the full weight of that chandelier, he realized two things almost instantly. One, this thing was way heavier than he was, and two, gravity was not about to negotiate with him. And as Gerry is watching this all unfold from the department store floor, that old rhyme from Gertie starts playing in his head. It was like this surreal soundtrack to the disaster, the words just marching along perfectly in time with the fall. The result was, well, it was inevitable. The crash was described as biblical. The entire chandelier just collapsed in on itself. Every single layer of crystal shattered as it hit the floor, sending thousands of tiny shards exploding in every direction. Now, for anyone who knows their British sitcoms, this whole scene might bring to mind a really famous moment from Only Fools and Horses. But here's the crucial difference. This wasn't TV. There was no blanket waiting to catch it, and there was definitely no laugh track. Just the sound of shattering glass and, well, shattered dreams. So, in the immediate aftermath, the air in that store was just thick with shock and devastation. But it was also filled with one of the most inappropriate human reactions you can possibly have in a crisis. With the final line of that rhyme, the effects of gravity can be grave, still echoing in his head, Gerry broke the stunned silence. He just blurted out the very first thing that popped into his mind. And that was it. That one line just broke him. Gerry completely dissolved into helpless, hysterical laughter. Across the floor, his manager quickly ducks down, pretending to mess with his shoes, but you could see his shoulders shaking. The customer, meanwhile, was, as you can imagine, absolutely furious. Her dream chandelier was in a million pieces, and the staff were laughing about it. So, what's the real takeaway here? This is more than just a funny story about a terrible day at work. It's really about how ideas, even the silly ones, plant themselves in our minds. I mean, just look at the journey this one little rhyme took. It starts as a national safety campaign in the 70s. Then it's passed down through personal mentorship in the 90s. And then, decades later, it just bubbles up to become the internal monologue for a catastrophe. That's a pretty incredible journey for a piece of culture. And this right here is the real power of these daft lessons. They embed themselves so deeply in our minds that they actually shape how we react to things. The rhyme obviously didn't stop the disaster from happening, but for Gerry, it gave him a framework to process it. A darkly comedic one, passed down directly from his mentor, Gertie.
Which kind of leaves us with one final thought. We all have them, right? Those weird little jingles, the strange warnings from family, or the silly rhymes we were taught years and years ago. So what's the daft lesson that has surprisingly stuck with you all these years?